So first I want to thank Latanya Jones at IAPST. She is the one that is providing the CE units today in partnership with the School of Sex Therapy. ADHD is a kind of a near and dear to my heart. I have ADHD, my partner has ADHD, I have two kids that have ADHD. 8.7 to 10.3 million. The likelihood of somebody coming in a partnership that has ADHD is fairly high. Some estimates say that there are about 16.4 million or 10% or more of the population here in the United States. We know that ADHD is highly heritable, about 76% heritable. And so if you have like a couple that come in, one of the things that they're talking about is parenting issues, you would likely have an ADHD parent. These are just kind of some of the things to start to be on the lookout. So let's see here. So let's talk about some misconceptions and truths. You're going to hear a lot of misconceptions, right? ADHD isn't a real disorder. It's a modern farce. No one really needs medication for ADHD. And the truth is that we can trace this back to the 1700s, right? And currently, we've made a lot of progress in terms of diagnostics, and we can, about 86% of the time, look at the brain structures using MRI and see size differences, mass differences, shape differences in the structures of the brain that are problematic in ADHD individuals. And so we're seeing in real time that ADHD has structural parts of it that impact our clients. We're seeing a lot of improvements with medication. We're actually seeing structural improvements in the brain with medication. So some of the other myths are people who take ADHD medication are more likely to abuse drugs. Again, not true. ADHDers who are prescribed appropriate medications, taken appropriately at appropriate doses, are less likely to seek those normalizing effects through substance use. Some of the other ones are that ADHD is overdiagnosed, only boys have it, and the facts show us that ADHD equally affects both genders, right? And we see more underdiagnosis specifically of those assigned female at birth. One of the other myths is that people with ADHD can't focus, and that's only one presentation. There are a number of things that ADHDers struggle with. And so focus and attention is just one dynamic. The other one that we see is that it's a learning disability. It's not a learning disability. It's a disorder of self-regulation, and it's not indication of knowledge or skills. The other thing that we commonly hear is you outgrow ADHD. We don't outgrow ADHD. We turn to learn to manage it better, and that we learn that it doesn't go away when we sleep either, right? So I want you to think about this for a second when you're thinking about couples who may walk into your room. By the time that kids that are diagnosed with ADHD by the time they are 12, they've had 20,000 negative statements. 20,000. That's 8 a day, right? And you're distracted, if you just focus, if you just this, and that's drip by drip. And it adds up. And so those are some things to be thinking about. So let's talk about common themes that we're going to see in couples. We're going to see things like employment, problems of finances. We're going to see things like deficits in education. We're going to see driving aggressive or reckless driving. We're going to see issues with sexuality. We're going to see issues with chores or parenting. We're going to see things like emotional regulation issues, irritable, stressed. We'll have erratic sleeping habits, unhealthy eating, problems in social skills with communication. So we're going to see a number of those things. When we break them down into themes and symptoms, right, we're going to see things like being distracted, multitasking not going as well as they would like it to. We're going to see poor follow through, being scattered. We're going to see distracted in conversations or distracted when they're getting instructions. We'll see contentious communication patterns, and that's important when we look at couples, the contentious communications. We often hear things like, they don't listen to me. He doesn't pay attention. I'm not important enough. You'll hear talking about blurting out information or being absent-minded or faulty recall. You'll hear things like authoritative, they're so hard on our kids. Or they'll act without thinking of the consequences. And they get irritable easily. And you'll see things like missing social cues, feeling internally restless, and low emotional intimacy. And that's something I hear a lot. Then we have like the non-ADHD partners, that the things that you're going to hear and see from them are things like they have difficult coping skills around their partner's symptoms. They get a lot of disappointment, which turns to anger. If I had a dollar for every time somebody said, I feel baited and switched, right? Like, I didn't agree to marry someone with ADHD, right? And you'll see physical symptoms in non-ADHD partners. Headaches, stomach aches, shoulder aches, carrying tension. You'll see things like depression creep up, anxiety creep. You'll see hypervigilance of like, I'm scanning to make sure that my partner doesn't forget something, or that the kids don't get picked up, or things like that. One of the key things that I see often in my practice is 3, 4 therapists. You're a third therapist, you're a fourth therapist, because they've gone into the emotional pieces of the problems, and they're not looking at the structural or brain pieces, and are not educating their clients. And if you go into those and to trauma too fast, it's going to fail. They have to have a paradigm shift before you can get them to that spot. And I'm going to talk more about the role of psychoeducation as a therapeutic intervention. And it's a really important intervention. You're going to hear a lot of all or nothing statements. And it's not uncommon for these folks to come to you and have negative beliefs about ADHD and are attributing these symptoms or behaviors as malicious or negative attributions. And you'll hear things like, I can never do anything perfect. I can't get it right. They want it perfect. Or like, I suck, right? I just suck. And they filter things through this negative lens and jumping to conclusions easily and quickly. They catastrophize things. You're going to hear a ton of should statements. Well, you should be able to do this. You should. Everybody thinks this way. And the truth is that the way the ADHD brain is wired is so vastly different from a neurotypical brain that you're going to see clashes, a lot of clashes. You're going to hear things like, my partner can play video games for hours. He couldn't possibly have ADHD. They can focus. He's always on the phone. He can never be present. Can you just pay attention? You can pay attention when you want to. My favorite, just try harder. He's lazy. She has less willpower. They're selfish. One of my favorites also is, you can't have ADHD. You're so accomplished. You did so well in school. One of my favorite people is an MD and made it through med school running on adrenaline. What happens when you have couples that have they're getting this new diagnosis. You're going to see in the ADHD partner, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I can finally, this makes sense. They're going to feel like, oh, now I know what's wrong. There's a sense of relief. And then you'll see some turmoil, like, oh my gosh, now what do I do? Right? And then some anger. And there's, particularly in adults, ADHD adults, you'll see sadness and grief. What could I have done? What could it have been like if I had known this earlier, right? And then you'll see some anxiety and some acceptance, right? And then you're going to see things like confusion and relief and acceptance when the non-ADHD partner is like, oh, okay, now this is making sense to me. And so when you're at this stage, one of the interventions that's really important to work with your couples is to slow it down and really help each partner like begin to be acknowledged about their feelings, explore what these feelings arise around this. Don't rush through this. This is an important part of the process. Like finding out from them, what do they worry about, how this is impacting their lives, how it will impact their lives. Right? There is an enormous amount of stigma still around ADHD, and in particularly those who are going to use medication. And I'm going to talk about medication in detail. So many of your couples with ADHD are going to come in with a coexisting condition, and it's usually that condition that brings them into your office. It's not usually ADHD, right? You're going to see things like depression, alcohol, or substance use, anxiety. You'll see some eating disorders, some oppositional defiance or conduct or OCD. You're going to see a lot of sleep issues, lots. And then there is a diagnosis called central auditory processing disorder. And this I see a lot in my ADHD couples. What they hear, even though have normal hearing, does not translate to what is said. And they're often polarly opposite. What generally brings your clients in, between 65 and 89% of these folks that come in are going to come in with one of these other diagnoses first. I think it's really important that we get, if they're having a mental health issue, that you get them over to a good evaluator who has, especially if you feel like what they're presenting with is like one of these co-occurring disorders, and what your gut is saying, these sounds like ADHD interactional stuff. And so I always get my clients over to a good evaluator and med provider, and I obviously am biased. Like, I think Jennifer Livingston is a rock star. She's who I send everybody to in my practice. I have even sent people to her to talk to her about their diagnosis and take it back to their own providers. So really having someone who is skillful. And the key components to getting a good diagnosis, so you know what you're working with in ADHD, is a comprehensive evaluation that's going to look at a detailed patient history. They're going to look at family history. They're going to look at medical history. They're going to take, I like to send my clients with their partners so that they get the observation and collateral information from other people, right? And then a good medical evaluation to rule out other conditions, some like thyroid, diabetes, some of these things that can impact us. This will help us to get all of the players out on the table so we know what we're working with. And this will really help you in terms of moving into psychoeducation, because that's going to be a key component in the things that we're going to do. Some of the things that you're going to see in the non-ADHD partners' coping skills is that they'll move into this space where they're trying to understand and make sense of their partner's behaviors. Like, and they'll rationalize things like, maybe they misunderstood me. Oh, we all make mistakes. Maybe I wasn't clear, right? So that you'll see that at first, and then you'll start to see them managing the unmanageable. They're going to take on larger and larger portions of what their partners are not accomplishing. And this is to avoid being a nag. And they tend to get quiet, and they just do it and do it and do it until it results in resentment. And that resentment moves into this breaking down, right? They either emotionally or they physically, and that's when you start to see those other symptoms we talked about, like the physical symptoms, stomach aches, headaches, overwhelm. I always ask my clients to, who are experiencing that, please go get that checked out. Don't misattribute that. Oh, this is just an ADHD response to my partner, right? Like, then we're gonna see things like, we're gonna see them pattern in your office, like such as like they're gonna fail to follow through, they're gonna communicate poorly, they're either gonna emotionally overreact or underreact. I see a lot of withdrawal and shutdown, right? Lots and lots of that, which is gonna feel like dismissal to their non-ADHD partner. And that dismissal is gonna bring us into distorted thinking and counterproductive reactions, right? That's where you're gonna start to see those cognitive distortions play out again, and misattributions that play out. The partner is gonna withdraw or pursue with hurtful, angry accusations. If you just were more mature, if you just get your shit together. Oops, sorry. And then we're gonna cycle, right? And they're gonna have a counterproductive response. That ADHD is gonna blow up, right? Or they're gonna shut down. And we're gonna start that whole cycle over again. So watching is very similar to like an EFT cycle, very much, right? So what do we do to start to change that interaction, right? And the first step is really interrupting their cycle, and that's where hey, this happened. You help them to own their stuff, right? I'm not asking you to own the whole thing, but if you can own a thread, right, that starts the downregulation process in the brain. And so we want them to start with owning their piece, how they show up with each other, what the impact is. I often ask people to, what do you experience in your body? I had one woman say to her partner, when you leave a huge mess for me, it feels like crushing pain on my chest, and I get so overwhelmed. And he shared, when I see a mess and I don't know what to do with it, I can't breathe. And I start to help them turn towards each other, wow, this is really having a big impact. And when they can acknowledge their impact on each other, and they can validate their lived experience, then they're more open to hearing the next pieces, right? And then when we start talking about teamwork, right? How do we work as a team to accomplish this? What do you do well? What are your strengths? And we ask them, and if their strength is running the kids and doing lots and lots of errands, but they are responsible for meal planning, and that's not their gift. I ask them to can we you look at the things that you're good at and redistribute those in ways that are in your strengths. I think one of the key components to good couples therapy when there is ADHD is psychoeducation, right? I spend a ton of time in psychoeducation. talking to each one of them about how vastly different the ADHD brain is wired, how vastly different the structures of their brain are, because we can see in several regions of the brain that the sizes, the mass, the shapes are different. Their brain is not the same, and they process the world wildly different than their partners do. They process somatic experiences dramatically different than their partners do. The way they view things are dramatically different than their partners. And many times when you have a non-ADHD partner, well, they should be able to do this. They should be able to think this way. And the truth is they don't, right? And that gets attributed to negative feelings between the couple. And when they can start to see that's not the case, then you start to see shifting. And I will often talk to couples about Stephen Covey's cookie story. And I will tell them the cookie story. So a woman gets off her airplane, she goes into Hudson's, she grabs a water and she grabs a pack of cookies, and she goes and she pays for them, and she sits down. And she's behind this person with a newspaper. And he's turning the cookies back and forth, and she's getting madder and madder and madder. This dude's eating my cookies. And he turns and he gives the last cookie to her. Darn straight you're gonna give me that last cookie. Those are my cookies. And she goes to get on her next one. She reaches in her purse, and lo and behold, there's cookies. So, and I don't know about you, but when I read that, and most people are like, I'm like, how are you feeling about the guy who's turning back and forth the cookies? They're like, I'm so mad. And then when I say, she reaches in and pulls out the cookies, what happens? They're like, oh my gosh, you felt a deep change, a sensation. That's what we're aiming for, is that paradigm, that, right, around the misattributions and cognitive distortions that people have about how their partner shows up as being personal, it's being dismissive, it's being careless, and it really just isn't. And that opens us up to a place where we can start to add resourcing in, right? And one of the frontline resources is medication. And I asked myself, like, am I pro-medication? Am I anti-medication? No, I'm pro-patient. What is best for them, right? And I want them to have all the options on the table. And so medication is one of them. And for many, I'm not saying all, many, medication makes a huge, huge difference, right? And some people are saying, well, why would you give medication to someone who's already spun up? And that's because the stimulant works differently in an ADHD brain, and it mitigates ADHD symptoms by increasing the available dopamine and norepinephrine in the brain, and that transmits, helping the signals along the neural pathway. And I talk to clients about this. I spend time telling them about this. And then, luckily for me, like, I have someone like Jennifer who can, then they go in and she tells them the same things that I'm telling them, right? And so we're working in partnership, right? You're going to see a lot of people who are resistant because they've heard a lot of the myths. And that's when going back into this psychoeducation and teaching them the truths about the myths. And I like data. I want to see it in research. And so when I talk to them, it's driven by that data piece. And I have tons and tons of research. So if there's a piece that you're interested in, like, send me an email and I will get that to you. Actually, that's not true. Tommy will probably get that to you because it's not my forte. So I also talked to them about how medication in the ADHD brain versus the non-ADHD brain processes, right? And talk to them about what the literature says. And what we're finding in the literature is that medication is a foundational part of treatment strategies, right? And when we can get that system stabilized, when we can help them regulate, when we can help them like have access to focus, attention, reduction of irritability, less negative narrative going through their mind, because they can feel at peace, when they can feel like they can accomplish and they're finally accomplishing the things that they want to, then you can start to add other structures. And so I think I am pro medication when it is appropriate for the patient. I think when you're doing psychoeducation around medication with your couples, like helping them to know that being proactive, having sustained efforts, not giving up, because you'll see that they'll try something and it may not work the first time. It may not work the first 4 times, right? Juggling types of medications, dosages, times of dosages, and having I'm not saying to know what those are, but know that that exists so that you can sit with your clients when they're frustrated that it may or may not be working, and moving back into that acknowledge and validating their experience and then giving them the courage. And I always turn them back to their provider. If they're not getting the results around their symptoms that they want, go back and talk to them. There are lots of options, lots of options. One of the things that I tell them is don't take the weekends off. Take your medication the same time every day and take it 7 days a week, right? Your brain gets used to wanting that, and then it throws them off. And when you see these up and down pitches. I encourage them to really reach out to their providers when they're having not getting the symptom results that they want. A good piece of what we do as therapists when we're talking about medicine as an intervention is to explore with them the benefits, the risks, the limitations, the fears, because there is a lot of fear about medication, what it means about them as a person, whether they'll be able to access it or not. And so part of what we do is sit with them in the discomfort, and you spend a lot of time acknowledging and validating, right? A huge component of working with ADHD couples sits in an acknowledging and validating. And that's not saying, oh, that must really suck. That's like, what's that like for you? Man, I can see that's really hard, right? I'm wondering if you might also feel this way, right? And when you're like saying like, I wonder if you feel like so overwhelmed, and they're like, oh, like that in and of itself. Like I think it was Carl Rogers that said that a good reflection is a revelation, right? They feel it, and it does help, right? Knowing these things, if you have an ADHD couple sitting in your office, really important. And so like, I ask them, like, what do you want medication to do, right? And I help them to develop SMART goals, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time sensitive, right? And that helps them work with their provider, right? That helps us to have a framework. Hey, like I'm finding when I get home, I'm super irritable. And that's when I say, okay, what is that like? How long has your medication been on board, right? What are you noticing? And if we're noticing those ADHD symptoms pop right back up, that's when I say, okay, like, what are your partners seeing? What are they feeling or experiencing? And then getting them back to their provider. This is a team effort, right? Doing couples therapy with those with ADHD as a team effort, and you're part of their team. And then I think it's really important that we don't always look at the negative pieces of being ADHD. What are you good at? And I will often have a session completely dedicated to what are you winning at? What are your successes? What was it like to experience that success? I asked them to look at what it felt like inside to experience that success. And this is not a fast process, right? Like this is sessions in, and I think that knowing that when you're working with an ADHD couple, whether it's one or the other or both that have this, slow is better. You want to speed up, go slow. And so celebration, ADHD couples need celebration. They need to feel like, oh, there is hope. Oh, I am getting it right. Oh, I can ask for what I need, and celebrating those moments with them. So, like, kind of the review, like, what do we want to do in ADHD therapy? We want to alter the view of the relationship. We want to modify dysfunctional interaction pattern that we talked about earlier. We want to increase emotional connection. That's why we want to do that celebratory part. And it's not just once. Like, you may have several sessions where they're bringing in difficulties. But then, like, I always try to lead with, like, what is going well? Right? What's going well? You want to improve communication and highlight their individual strengths, and use those individual strengths to put in those scaffolding that will help them achieve the best results. So again, like, psychoeducation is a big piece of what is at the forefront of good couples ADHD therapy, helping them to understand what their brain is doing, help them to dismantle those misattributions of behavior and cognitive distortions, right? Helping them to, like, look at alternative truths that might also be the case. Reminding them again of the brain differences that are happening, the things that we know to be true that we can see in neuroimaging. Talking to them about the role of potentially medication, and these are going to cycle up over and over again, and then, like, helping them to decide whether medication is good for them or not. Like, and I had a client that he was absolutely dead set, I'm not taking it, I don't want it. And so we put as much scaffolding as we could in place, right? And they came into my office and they were on the verge of divorce. They were just blowing up at each other. And, like, saying to them both, man, this is really hard. I can see how important this is to you. And what if there was an easier way? What if this could be easier? Would you be interested if this could be easier? And he was like, yes. And I said, how is the one medication that you're using helping? It's like dramatic. I said, what if you could have better results? What if your interactions could be easier? And he said, I would love that. And that's when you encourage them to go back to their trusted provider and look at that. And he did. He went back. The results are amazing, right? I just got an email from them because they had to reschedule an appointment. They're like, can we see you in January? Things are going really good. We're remodeling the basement. Okay. And so, like, psychoeducation and education are going to be huge components of what you will do. It's not fancy. It's not warm and fuzzy couples therapy. It's the dirty work, right? They want a magic bullet. I think we all do to some degree. And this is it, right? And it's slow. So let's talk about how we as clinicians can talk to them, right? When we can have this respectful communication with them, acknowledging their fears, acknowledging their struggles, and believing them when they tell us this is real for them. When you can start to create this role of empathy in the room, right? And they can see it modeled in you, they begin to start to model it between the two of them, right? And I've had people say to me, we looked at each other and said, what would Chris say, right? What would she tell us? And they would say, be soft, be gentle, right? And when we can get them to have this mutual empathy for each other through understanding these differences, that's when we start seeing better outcomes, right? And so we can achieve clinical empathy when clients feel seen, when they feel heard, when they feel known, when they feel valued, that their experience matters to us, right? And summarizing those things and reflecting it back to them. Am I hearing you well? Am I getting that right? Is there any piece that I'm missing, right? Hearing that, especially in the non-ADHD partner, that they're feeling heard can have a dramatic effect on that cycle that they get into, right? So like I try to break the cycle wherever that opening appears for me, because one little tiny change can have huge changes in the future, right? Huge, right? And so when I've established this mutual empathy, then I try to go into a collaboration with them. So what do you want your relationship to look like? How do you want it to be? I often will say to them, I want you to write your own ketubah. And they're like, what's a ketubah? A ketubah is this contract between the partners. And it doesn't matter whether they're married or cohabitating, whether they're a same-sex relationship or not. I ask them to sit down and write this document. What do you want it to look like? So we have a roadmap now that we have this foundation stabilized to what they want to look forward to, right? And hope will do a lot of things for an ADHD couple, right? And I'll ask them using motivational interview. My favorite thing is to use the Darn Cats model, and that is, what is it that I want to change? How do you think I'll be able to do it, right? Why would you want to make these specific changes, right? Because if they can start to build their own system of, yes, I want to do this. This is how I can do it. This is why I want to do it. This is why I need to do it. Then you're starting to get them to form their own commitments, to help drive that motivation to make some changes, right? And so when I'm working with a couple, I avoid yes or no questions, right? I will ask them what questions, what gets in the way, what's helpful, when do you have the best success, right? And I use it from a strengths perspective. I always want to be looking towards what are their strengths. How do I get them into their strengths? How do I remind them what they mean to each other, right? And I ask them, what happens when I say the word, why did you wear those shoes? They're like, they bristle. And there's pretty decent research around the word why. Why invites defense. What invites internal introspection, right? It invites inquiry. What happened? Then they're not trying to defend or trying to analyze, right? then they're starting to get into that space where they can access those things. Because if they're in defense, and especially if an ADHD is in defense mode, they can't tell you. And it's not that they don't want to, they can't. They flood, they overwhelm, and they can't. So if they can't tell me what's happened, I'll say to them, what are you experiencing in your body right now? And if you can't speak, just point to me. You know, is it here? Is it there? Is it here? And then get curious about those pieces. Help their partner get curious about those pieces. And I will say to couples, like, when you see your partner like agitating, either one of you, right? Don't ask them what's wrong. Don't say, are you mad? I ask them to say, hey, what's happening right now? I'm noticing something, right? And many times they're like, oh my gosh. When they can move to like, what's happening? They can say like, man, I'm really stressed, or I got cut off, or I don't know, right? And that, you know, we always want to be inviting curiosity with ADHD couples. That's going to be really important. And like as a therapist, when you're stuck and they're in their patterns, I will say, hold on, slow down just a second. I want to know you really well. Could you tell me more? Right? And that's going to give you the space to re-regulate, because sometimes when they're in these patterns, right, and it's happening in your room, it can be really overwhelming for the therapist, right? And we fled too, just like our clients fled. And so one of the ways that we can kind of slow that down is asking them to slow down, and then asking them, tell me more about this. And they have to start to like, oh, what do I want to tell her about this? What do I want to tell him about this? And that gives you that space to kind of take a deep breath and then like remind yourself to get curious, right? What am I curious about? What's happening? Well, I noticed your face got scrunchy, or I noticed your shoulders went up, or I noticed that you've mentioned this several times. Can you tell me more about that? Right? That's when we can, again, start to interrupt that pattern, right? As the tell me more. And I have used that a lot. Tell me more. So I don't prescribe to any one specific model when I'm working with couples, right? I have been trained in all 4 of the top 4 couples models, and I use them sort of as a tapestry, right? So that I'm fitting whatever it is that I'm doing, what works best for them. And so in terms of models, I know that there's a lot of EFT therapists, there's a lot of Gottman therapists, there's a lot of Imago therapists, there's a lot of PAC therapists. And all of those models have really wonderful interventions. And what I tell people is, make sure your interventions are flexible, they're adaptable, and above all else, keep balance in your room, right? Because it's real easy to align with one partner over the other, right? Especially, like, so I'm ADHD, my partner is autistic. It's very easy for me to align with the ADHD partner. I get it. I forget too. And like, man, that's really hard when that happens. Like, it's really hard. And so like kind of checking your own transference, right? And making sure there's balance in your room. And like, I'll be engaging with an ADHDer and I'll say, I promise I'm coming. And then say, do you mind if I spend a second with your partner? I really want to hear what they have to say too. It's really important. And so balance in the room is super important, whether you're working with ADHD couples or whether you're working with neurotypical couples, right? Like, balance in the room is super, super important. So let's talk for a second about some key interventions. But a lot of therapists want to run in when there's ADHD and like move into this emotional piece or move into trauma pieces. And I'm not going to say that it doesn't work. I will say that I rarely see it work. Right? If you run into trauma and you've already got an activated couple, it's like pouring gasoline on chocolate briquette. Right? And so I'm not telling therapists don't work with trauma. I'm saying order it well, right? And we got to start with like acknowledging that that they're in this interactional pattern that's not working for them, and believing them how hard it is in that pattern, and then moving into psychoeducation. I have seen over and over and over, it's the cookie story, right? Where they like, I didn't realize how differently we thought. I didn't realize how hard that was for them, right? That's when you can start to turn them towards each other, right? And that's what we want to do. We want to turn them towards each other. We don't want to divide them, but we have to educate them on these pieces. That's really, really important. And I like to do the 2112s, and I will often do a couple of those. And I know that there are people are going to be like, oh my gosh, like you should never see a client individually. However, like I think that you have to fit the needs of your clients at the forefront. And what I'm finding, particularly with ADHD couples, is that I meet with them together, and then I meet with them individually, and that gives them the opportunity to like, this is my struggle. They can blurt it out loud. They can be overwhelmed. And then we pick up these pieces and say, what are we going to take back? And I frame this as that we're going to take this back and we're going to share with our partner what we learned in our individual session together. And we'll do this a couple of times. And they're able to like word vomit, for lack of a better word, and then pick up the pieces that are really important because they've gotten it out of their brains. They've expressed it, and their partner's not sitting in the room experiencing it, right? Then they can pick it back up, not as emotionally loaded, and say, when you forgot to pick up the milk, like, it just derailed me, and I was so overwhelmed, right? When I forgot to pick up the milk, I had just nearly got into a car accident, and I am so sorry, right? And so, dismantling some of the cognitive distortions that will let them go back and talk to their partners, right? I don't do trauma work individually with an ADHD couple, right? I think that's dangerous. I think that is very much left for an individual therapist. Well, when we're talking about symptomatic behaviors that are impacting, that's when I can sit with them for an hour. They can just unfiltered talk to me about it, and then we can back it up and take it into the couples therapy session and say, how do we want to, are these important for us to change, right? How would you like for those things to change? And I try to make these come together sessions very collaborative. I ask them to come out of the words negotiate, right? Negotiate is a lose-lose. Somebody's gonna lose, right? And like if you've ever gone in to buy a car and you've negotiated a deal, the dealer's lost something and you have to pay more for something. We don't want that in our couples therapy. When we work from a collaborative perspective, right? We're coming together. The goal is connection, intimacy, whatever their goals are, right? Then we come together as a collaborative team. What's the goal? Is this going to get us towards our goal? Right? Does it fit? And when I give homework, I use a different word with ADHDers. I don't give ADHDers homework. You say the word homework, and ADHDer is going to go, oh, and it's gonna feel like a gigantic burden. So I'll say things like take home, exercise, or more often I'll say, can we try an experiment? Would you be willing to try an experiment? And they're like, yeah, right? Right? And I'll say, I want you to just try this. And neurotypical or ADHD are given the same exercise. I want you to go home and I want you to start finding each other doing good. Once a day, find each other doing good. And they're like, what's that going to do? And I said, well, this goes back into this psychoeducation piece that you're going to do over and over and over with ADHD couples. Well, we want to hijack the brain's neurochemistry, right? So when we do something good, dopamine drops in our brain. Everyone loves dopamine, sort of like sugar, right? Everyone loves it, and we want to repeat that. And so when you say to your partner, this really matters, thank you so much, right? Dopamine drops, and we want to replicate that. And I'll often tell them the story about B.F. Skinner, who took graduate students and he put them in the homes of kids who were having problematic behavior. And they were instructed, I want you to find the kids doing good and randomly praise them. And what they found was that the problematic behaviors began to become extinguished, and they became. So when we can set our partners up for success, right, that's what we want to do. We want to teach our clients, these couples, to set each other up for success, right? And that starts by, like, I have them start, and it's once a day that we're looking for this. And then I ask them, like, let's say, like, your partner comes to you and they say, like, man, you know, like, you kissed me on the forehead before you left for work today. Like, I want you to tell your partner how meaningful that was. Because I'll say to them, you know, did you know how meaningful? Of course he knows how meaningful that is to me. And he's like, no. Right? Because we experience it, we think they must surely know. And the truth is that, and it's specifically in ADHDers, they've had those 20,000 by the time that you are 12 negative messages. Like, they don't know, right? And so, you know, reinforcing that, having them have that shared emotional experience is really important. And then I tell them, you know, like, I want you to be checking in with each other, right? And they're like, you know, well, we don't have anything exciting. Like, you know, I'm like, no, like, you would be really surprised by check-ins. And that's a key intervention I use with ADHD couples, check-ins. Right? Once a week, I want you to sit down on Sunday and I want you to look at your schedule. Because what may look like not a big deal to you may be a big deal to your partner, right? And so, like, that starts to help them be in the know with their partner, right? That's sort of like creating that love map, right? Knowing what's going on in their partner's world, right? And then I ask them, and specifically the ADHDers, like, I want you to check in with your partner. 10 minutes of couch time, right? 10 minutes. Everybody has 10 minutes, right? Sit down, right? And if you If all that you can do is favorite part of your day, worst part of your day. And I ask them to start with their favorite part of their day, because sometimes they'll get talking about their favorite part of their day, and it totally changes the dynamic. Again, we're always wanting to focus back on strengths, and we're not talking toxic positivity here. We're talking about circling them back to strengths, right? Too often, I had a conversation with a dear colleague, and she said, she'd been to group consult where we are constantly focusing on the negative and keeping people sick. And she's right? And we don't want to do that. As mental health professionals, like we're tasked with do no harm, do good. And when we can foster resilience and independence and reciprocity and health, our goals as couples therapists should be to work ourselves out of a job, right? That is our goal, right? And so if we are circling back to strengths, if we're getting clients to be more connected, are we going to get everything we want in couples therapy? No, right? Can we get the majority? Yes. And I think we got to focus more on what our couples are doing right. And so when kind of to summarize what I think are really important pieces of working with ADHD couples are, acknowledging their lived experience. You're not going to get anywhere if you don't acknowledge their lived experience. If you want to run headlong into problem solving or going into deep emotional work, and I don't want to dismiss anybody's experienced in the chair, your clients best. However, I see lots and lots and lots of ADHD and autistic couples acknowledging their lived experience has been key in my work. When I fail to do that is when I get stuck at the beginning. Acknowledging the role that ADHD plays in the relationship, both from the perspective of how their brains are structured differently to how they interpret the world differently, and that having them acknowledge to each other the impact of the ADHD in their relationship, and owning what their responses to it. The importance of helping them to understand psychoeducation at the forefront is going to be super important in working with them. I honestly believe that when we know better, we do better, right? And if we are obligated to do no harm and to do good for our clients, we have a duty to educate them about what's going on. And then, I tell clients all the time, finding each other is not a one-week experiment. This is a lifelong thing that throughout your life will make your marriage, your relationship, your friendship a better place to be, right? And I use my grandparents I was 16 and they were in their 70s and they were finding each other good. They were, right? I remember my grandmother had had a cold, and my grandfather saying, "Virginia, come here and give me a kiss." And my grandma was 4'11", and she said, "Walter, I wait till I can really kiss you." You could tell they liked each other. They were reaching for each other. They were finding each other doing good. And that was really impactful. And building on their strengths. Don't try to ask a short person to get the cereal off the top shelf. right? Like, ask them, what are they good at? What are their strengths? And then help them build using their strengths to build the relationship they want. And then finally, the importance of checking in, building that love map with them, the understanding, right, of where they're each at will help crystallize and motivate them to get things done. And so, like, I pared this down from 10,000 words. There is a million things I missed. I could go into far greater depth in terms of the interventions. There's lots and lots of interventions for time blindness and things that I use. But in terms of the first probably 10 weeks that you are in a session with couples, this is the predominant work that I do with ADHD folks, because this lays the foundation for all of those other tools